Imagine standing in the heart of Los Angeles, the city where Hollywood taught the world to believe in the American dream. Now turn one corner. The dream disappears. In front of you are no red carpets or million-dollar mansions, but rows of tents packed tightly along the sidewalk. The smell of trash in the air, shouting in the night, and people struggling just to survive one more day. This is not a slum in a poor country. This is Los Angeles, one of the richest cities on earth. What truly shocks Americans is not only the number, more than 75,000 people without a home. It is the brutal contrast inside the same city. The place where tech companies create billions of dollars in value is also the place where people sleep on the streets because they cannot afford a small room. Where luxury cars pass by every day is also where fentanyl creeps into every alley. Where just a few grains can take a life. But this story is not simply about drugs or poverty. It is about a system that is cracking. A system where one small slip, losing a job, getting sick, a divorce, is enough to fall through every safety net. And once you hit the sidewalk, the road back almost disappears. Not because you do not try, but because this city runs by rules that leave no space for the weak. Los Angeles is still alive. Food trucks glow late into the night. Neighborhoods stay busy. Good meals are served, and dreams are still sold every day. But beneath that surface is a crisis America has not yet solved. The question is not why Los Angeles has become this bad. The real question is, if this can happen here, what is waiting for the rest of America's cities? To understand why Los Angeles has fallen into this situation, we must first strip away the easy explanations like addiction or laziness. The homelessness crisis in LA is not a social accident. It is the result of many layers of problems stacking up over decades, quietly building until they exploded in the very center of one of America's richest cities. The first layer is housing. Los Angeles does not lack money, but it severely lacks affordable housing. For years, the city prioritized luxury real estate, single-family neighborhoods, and high-profit developments, while housing for low and middle-income people was pushed aside. As a result, rent rose faster than wages. A small studio apartment can consume almost the entire paycheck of a full-time minimum wage worker. Lose a job for a few months or face a medical emergency, and many people immediately lose the ability to pay. What makes this worse is that once housing is lost, getting back into the system becomes extremely difficult. Without a fixed address, it is hard to get a job. Without a stable job, it is impossible to rent a place. This vicious cycle turns the sidewalk into the final stop, not a choice. For many, homelessness is not the starting point of failure, but the end of a long chain of setbacks. The second layer is mental health and substance addiction. Los Angeles has a high concentration of people with mental health disorders, yet lacks effective long-term treatment systems. The closure of large psychiatric institutions in the past, combined with policies that strongly prioritize individual freedom, has left many people trapped in between. They are not dangerous enough to be forced into treatment, but not stable enough to care for themselves. The streets become the only place they can exist. Fentanyl has made this crisis far more deadly. Unlike older drugs, fentanyl is cheap, extremely powerful, and easy to overdose on. It does not only destroy long-term addicts, but also pulls in newly homeless people who use it to forget hunger, cold, and fear. When a substance is strong enough to kill with just a few grains, the street is no longer a temporary shelter. It becomes a truly dangerous zone. The third layer is law and policy. Los Angeles and the state of California are constrained by legal rulings that say homeless people cannot be removed from public spaces unless alternative housing is available. This came from humane intentions, but in reality it has created paralysis. The city cannot clear encampments, yet it also cannot build enough temporary housing fast enough. The result is that areas like Skid Row persist year after year, growing larger and more out of control. At the same time, the money spent is not small. Billions of dollars have gone into temporary housing programs, converted hotels, and social services, but their impact is weakened by complex bureaucracy, high administrative costs, and poor coordination between different levels of government. For ordinary residents, this creates a sense of frustration and helplessness. The money is spent, but the tents still appear every night. What unsettles American audiences the most is this truth: it could happen to many people. Most homeless individuals in LA were not outsiders from the start. They had jobs, families, and ordinary lives. But in a city where the cost of living is extremely high and the social safety net is thin, one fall is enough to knock someone off course. Los Angeles, then, is not just a city with problems. It is a magnified mirror of the contradictions inside modern American society. Between wealth and fragility, between personal freedom and collective responsibility, between the dream that is promised and a reality that grows harsher every year. And when those contradictions are no longer hidden by Hollywood lights, they force a single, uncomfortable question into the open: how rich does a society need to be before it becomes truly safe for the people living inside it? Once the structural causes are clear, the next step is to face the reality unfolding every day on the streets of Los Angeles. This is where numbers gain faces, and abstract policies turn into real human lives. Walk just a few blocks from the financial district, and you enter a different world, one where the ideas of home, safety, and privacy almost disappear. Skid Row is no longer a temporary zone. It has become a permanent living space for thousands of people. Tents are packed so tightly that sidewalks vanish. Trash piles up because there are not enough public bathrooms. Clean water becomes a luxury. Disease spreads in an environment where even a small wound can turn into a serious complication. This is not the image of a short-term crisis. It is the sign of a system that allowed a problem to last for far too long. What matters is that most people here do not wake up planning to break laws or cause trouble. They wake up with very basic questions: where will I eat today? Where will I sleep? And how do I stay safe at night? When life shrinks to these minimum needs, ideas about their future, planning, or reintegration lose their meaning. The street is not just a place to live. It becomes a state of existence. Fentanyl turns that state into a deadly spiral. Unlike previous drug waves, fentanyl does not take years to destroy a life. One wrong dose can be fatal. For people without housing, fentanyl is not just an addiction. It is a way to briefly forget hunger, cold, and fear. But every use is a gamble with death. Its widespread presence has changed the atmosphere of the streets. Emergency responses become routine. Medical workers face overdose cases one after another. Nearby residents live in constant tension. This creates a negative chain reaction. Communities push back against encampments. Officials face pressure to act, but without solutions that are fast and large enough. Every response becomes temporary and reactive. One of the most haunting realities is homeless children. Many still go to school every day, trying to learn while having no stable place to sleep at night. School becomes the last anchor of normal life. But when classes end, they return to uncertainty. Learning under these conditions is not just an intellectual challenge. It is an emotional one. These children grow up faster than their age, yet remain more vulnerable than almost anyone else. At the same time, Los Angeles continues to rely on support networks, food banks, mobile meal trucks, charities, and volunteers are everywhere. People do not starve overnight, but this support is like a blood transfusion for a chronic patient. It keeps life going, but it does not cure root cause. In some cases, it even allows the situation to drag on because the system never reaches the point where deep change becomes unavoidable. What makes the crisis even harder to solve is the clash of interests. Residents want clean and safe streets. Activists want to protect the rights of unhoused people. Officials fear lawsuits and political backlash. Meanwhile, those living in tents continue to exist in the middle of these debates. Rarely given a real voice, they become a topic of discussion, not people who are truly heard. For American audiences, this is the moment to confront an uncomfortable truth. Homelessness is not the problem of a distant, isolated minority. It is a byproduct of a system that many people participate in. When housing becomes an investment tool instead of a basic need, when healthcare and mental health support are out of reach, when a single economic shock can shake an entire life, What is happening on the streets of Los Angeles is not an exception. It is a warning signal, not only for this city, but for any place that believes economic growth alone will solve social problems. When the gap between a polished surface and sidewalk reality keeps widening, the question is no longer whether a crisis exists, but how much of its society is willing to accept before it is forced to change the way it works. When faced with the daily reality on the streets, Los Angeles is forced into the hardest breaking point of the homelessness crisis. This is no longer just an emotional or moral debate. It is a series of policy choices built on trade-offs, where no option is fully right, and every decision carries long-term consequences. The first option is enforcement and public order. Many residents, especially those living near encampments, believe the city has been too lenient. They ask why sidewalks, parks, and public spaces have been occupied for so long. From this perspective, clearing encampments and forcing people off the streets is seen as necessary to restore safety, sanitation, and public trust. Supporters of this approach often argue that no city can function normally if laws are not enforced, but the downside of enforcement is clear. When there is not enough alternative housing or support services, clearing encampments simply pushes the problem from one neighborhood to another. People lose the fragile stability they had, along with documents, medication, and informal support networks. For those with severe mental illness or addiction, sudden displacement can make conditions worse. Instead of addressing root causes, enforcement often only changes the location of the crisis. The second option is supportive housing and harm reduction. This model focuses on providing stable housing first, then addressing issues like addiction, mental health, and employment. Research shows that when people have a roof over their heads, their ability to recover increases significantly. But in Los Angeles, implementing this approach faces major barriers: high construction costs, long approval processes, local opposition, and long waiting times mean progress moves far slower than the crisis itself. Harm reduction is also deeply controversial. Programs that provide clean needles, overdose reversal drugs, and mobile medical services aim to keep people alive and are seen as humane. But many worry that this approach unintentionally normalizes drug use and weakens motivation to quit. The tension between saving lives in the moment and achieving long-term recovery leaves policy stuck in a constant tug-of-war, satisfying no one completely. Between these two paths lies California's complex legal system. Court rulings designed to protect the rights of unhoused people are grounded in human rights, but when they are not matched with the capacity to provide housing and treatment, they create enforcement gaps. City leaders are trapped between the risk of lawsuits and pressure from voters. Every action can be criticized as either too harsh or too weak. What makes this crisis especially hard to resolve is the fragmentation of responsibility. City, county, state, and federal governments all play roles, but rarely is there a single authority with enough power and resources to coordinate a full response. Funding is spread across many programs, each with its own goals and metrics. Meanwhile, unhoused people do not live inside budget categories. They live on the street, where every delay is visible and immediate. For American audiences, this breaking point reflects a larger question. This is not only Los Angeles's crisis, it is a test of how the United States deals with the failures of its own system. How much does a society that values personal freedom intervene when individuals can no longer protect themselves? How wealthy does a city have to be before it is considered responsible for ensuring that no one sleeps outside? There are no simple answers, but avoiding these questions only allows the crisis to deepen and harden. Los Angeles now stands between choosing imperfect action or allowing continued decline through silence. And at this breaking point, the story moves beyond one city. It becomes a warning for any place that believes economic growth and spontaneous goodwill are enough to keep society stable when its safety nets begin to fracture. After passing the breaking point of policy choices, Los Angeles enters a phase where the homelessness crisis is no longer seen as a problem to be solved quickly, but as a long-term condition that society is forced to live with. This is the most dangerous phase. When a crisis becomes familiar, their will to act decisively begins to fade. On the surface, the city still functions. Tourism continues to bring in billions of dollars. Entertainment districts, restaurants, events, and cultural life remain vibrant. Food trucks light up every night. Night markets are packed. Streets buzz with activity, as if life has not been interrupted. But walk a few more blocks and a parallel reality appears. Tents, free meal trucks, mobile medical teams, and police patrols form their own ecosystem, separate, yet inseparable from the city itself. For many unhoused people, life slowly shifts from crisis mode to a form of stable survival. Not stable in a positive sense, but stable in its familiarity with risk. They know where to find food, which places are relatively safe to sleep, and which areas to avoid after dark. Once people adapt to life on the streets, pulling them back into the formal system becomes even harder. Every passing day makes returning more difficult than the one before. At the same time, the broader community grows tired. Residents near encampments move from anger to resignation. Social workers and activists face burnout as their efforts fail to create change on the scale required. City leaders become trapped in cycles of reports, budgets, and political battles. In this environment, small solutions continue to appear, enough to show that something is being done, but not enough to change the overall direction. Another dangerous consequence is moral sorting. As the crisis drags on, society begins to divide who is worthy of help and who is seen as beyond saving. Those who appear more sympathetic, who have cleaner stories or clearer paths to recovery, often receive more compassion. Those with severe addiction, unstable behavior, or serious mental illness are gradually treated as unsolvable. When that line is crossed, the boundary between indifference and acceptance disappears. Los Angeles also faces a deep paradox. The city has enough money, technology, and expertise to build advanced solutions, yet the complexity of the system itself slows everything down. Each supportive housing project takes years to complete. Each new policy must survive layers of opposition and lawsuits. Meanwhile, the streets do not wait. Every night brings more people sleeping outside, more overdose risks, and more children growing up in uncertainty. For American audiences, this is where the story becomes personal. Homelessness is no longer something that happens to someone else. It is a reminder that in a society with high living costs and a thin safety net, many people are only one slip away from the sidewalk. This reality shakes the belief that hard work and effort alone are always enough to protect a stable life. On a broader level, Los Angeles becomes a magnified image of a question facing the entire country. How wealthy does a nation need to be before it has fulfilled its duty to the most vulnerable? How far should personal freedom go when individuals can no longer protect themselves? And how much visible suffering is society willing to tolerate before calling it a collective failure? There are no easy answers, but allowing a crisis to become normal is itself a choice, even if few admit it. When tents become a familiar part of the urban landscape, when overdoses turn into routine headlines, and when homeless children become just another line in a report, society quietly lowers its expectations in a dangerous way. This part of the story does not end with a solution, but with a warning. Los Angeles shows what happens when wealth and inequality coexist for too long without being addressed at the root. It reminds us that social crises rarely explode in a single moment. They grow slowly, through delayed decisions, half measures, and compromises, until they become part of everyday life, visible to everyone, yet somehow beyond anyone's real ability to change. As the story reaches its end, Los Angeles is no longer just a place on a map. It becomes a symbol, not of Hollywood or glamour, but of a wealthy society confronting the limits of its own system. What makes Los Angeles frightening is not extreme poverty itself, but the fact that poverty exists side by side with prosperity, so visible it can no longer be ignored. This city reveals a truth many Americans would rather not face. The American dream does not collapse in a single moment, and it is not destroyed by an outside enemy. It is slowly worn down by cracks inside the system, by living costs rising far faster than incomes, by a social safety net too thin to catch sudden falls. and by the belief that markets and spontaneous goodwill will eventually fix everything on their own. Los Angeles is where those cracks are magnified. Losing a job, facing surgery, falling into addiction, or experiencing a family crisis can push someone out of the system far faster than the system can pull them back in. When that happens, the sidewalk becomes the final boundary between life inside society and life on the margins. And once someone stays on the margins long enough, getting back is no longer about personal effort alone. It depends on whether society has the will to pull them back up. For American audiences, this story is not only about Los Angeles, it is a warning for any city moving in the same direction. When housing becomes an investment tool instead of a basic need. When mental health is ignored until it becomes a crisis. When addiction is treated as a personal failure instead of a public health issue. These choices do not cause immediate collapse, but they accumulate over time, until they erupt in the places where they are most visible. The most troubling part is not that the United States lacks solutions. Supportive housing, addiction treatment, mental health care, and prevention models already exist. The real problem is inconsistency and the lack of political courage to apply them at the scale required. Every solution meets resistance, because it demands money, time, and the acceptance that not everyone will like the short-term results. Yet the cost of doing nothing is far greater. Even if it is rarely measured honestly, Los Angeles shows what happens when a society accepts crisis as part of the normal landscape. Moral boundaries begin to shift. What once shocked becomes familiar. What once felt unacceptable becomes something people learn to avoid with their eyes. And when that indifference spreads, the crisis does not only harm those on the margins, it erodes the shared belief that society is working for everyone. This story does not need a loud call to action or a simple solution. What it needs is an honest question. If one of the richest, most creative, and most powerful cities in the world cannot protect tens of thousands of people from sleeping on the streets, what does that say about the structure we trust? And if we continue to treat this as the problem of one city, one state, or one group of people, what larger truth are we refusing to see? Los Angeles is not an exception. It is a preview of what can happen when economic growth is not matched by social protection, and when a dream is built without a strong safety net beneath it. The final question is not whether Los Angeles can change. The real question is whether we are willing to face what the city is reflecting, before tents, sidewalks, and abandoned lives become familiar images everywhere.